Hey guys, it's Daniel here. Mike's with me as well. This is going to be our first episode of The Red Lodge, a podcast about pretty much anything you can put on a screen. With me here is the one and only Mike. Mike, how you doing?
Good. Perfect.
Are you glad to be here? Finally, this has been in the making for years.
Nearly years now. Welcome. And this is our first episode now here. You haven't heard from us. We only have some very close people so far that are going to listen to us. And we are very, very much excited to actually finally getting down foot on the podcast scene.
It's been in the making. And please give us a follow on Instagram at the Red Lodge Pod and Twitter at the Red Lodge Pod as well. You're going to find probably some insight about our next updates. You're going to hear snippets from our episodes and our shows. Pretty much my background with movies is just I feel like I'm an audience member with great taste. I have no academic background with anything film. And frankly, I feel like neither does 90% of the people who watch movies. So I think my opinion will...
Haven't you done anything with movies? Wasn't there something that you did with...
Well...
Theater? Was it?
Well,
theater?
I went to a performing arts school, and that's the closest I got to theater, which is actually pretty nice. The performance, the productions they put on were fantastic.
That is something, definitely, yeah.
Yeah. What about yourself, Mike? What's your background with film?
Well, I have been a huge fan my whole life. Starting from the get-go, I was always a big Star Wars fan, and movie making was always in my blood somehow. I went actually to a little film school where I was doing a few things behind the camera and even once in front of the camera where it was more about like documentary style. I was movie critic and book critic. It was about like 2009, 2010. This is ultimately one of the few reasons why I even ended up here in the United States, in 2013.
Yeah, really? Welcome.
But that story for later.
It's not on fire. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, but this is about my background. I love talking about movies and everything, and I think like a podcast like that was definitely the answer for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Our first episode today is actually going to be about the revival of horror. Me and Mike both share an absolute admiration for the horror genre. I think, I'm just going to open it up, Mike. Why do you love horror? It's a loaded question, yeah.
It's a pretty loaded question, yeah. I remember back in the days when my dad had all this VHS tapes at home, and I would just like skip through them. And if he wasn't home, I would just like put one in and just try it out a little bit. So it started out with like really cheesy old 80s movies like The Mangler and Wolfen, and just a few scenes of those like practical effects like scared the hell out of me. For me, when I was a kid, I had a lot of nightmares and like bad dreams about all different kind of stuff, and eventually like I grew into this horror genre so deeply that it made a lot of my life.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Growing up, I guess I didn't really... when you're a kid, there's two different genres when you're a kid that are really impactful. At least for me, it was action movies and horror movies, because I felt something when I was watching an action movie. I can remember an action movie. I can remember a horror movie. As a kid, when you watch a comedy, you don't take that with you the rest of the day. But if you watch a horror movie, and don't watch horror movies, kids, not until you're of age to watch them. That's a lie. But when I watched a horror movie, it made me feel something more than any other movie that I've watched. It made me feel fear. Yeah. Fear is one of the biggest things that I think a kid can feel, and I didn't know I loved feeling scared until now. When I was a kid, I was addicted to feeling scared, and I didn't know that because I had a lot of movies. I think one of the first movies that I remember legitimately scaring me was Sleepaway Camp. We would rent movies, and we had rented Sleepaway Camp, and that scared the shit out of me because it's that movie's terrifying. The ending was absolutely just what? Like, I don't know. It was, and I also remember Jaws. People don't see Jaws as a really horror film, but
it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Truly,
yeah. Right.
Truly,
right. So it's not
deeply a really classic horror movie. Exactly. In that kind of way. It's one of those few movies. Always be careful, but one of those perfect movies. Yeah, Jaws is perfect.
Yeah, high up there.
Perfection, right?
And to me, I think as I grew up, the horror genre just became more appealing because it was a type of movie that you can watch with you can watch it by yourself or you can watch it with somebody else. It's one of those movies that's a sweet spot where or one of those genres that's the sweet spot where you can kind of enjoy it with somebody else or be even more scared. And
I watched so many horror movies in my lifetime now that I figured that I'm going to bring it out there at the very beginning. Like 95% or more of those horror movies that are out there are complete trash.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly just looking for the really, really good ones. It's kind of like start out with you when you're younger, you start to watch movies like Scream and those kind of movies and everything. And you feel like, oh my God, teenager, I can relate to them. And you just want to see someone like being like killed on screen right there. You want to see that. That's what's so appealing. And eventually you grow into it. Like you start drinking whiskey. You start with like Jack Daniels, and eventually you grow into drinking
the good shit.
And you're looking for like better stuff because you realize like I've tried this, not good, and you're looking for like the sweet spot there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is how it goes with like horror movies, and I'm constantly on the search for like the best of the best.
The cool thing about the horror genre is that it's such a deep hole. You'll get started into you'll start watching a couple horror movies and then you don't know how deep that hole is for that subgenre that you didn't know existed, or how far, when you discover international films that are terrifying. That was really one of the cool things about it too, is that the subgenre, you'll have slashers, you'll have zombie movies, it's its own genre, you'll have psychological thrillers, and they're all great pieces of candy when you go into that horror candy shop. And that's why I love horror. It's just it can go on forever, and I would absolutely love it if it did. And so, what we're going to be covering is the revival of horror. So, Mike, I'm gonna ask you, what horror movies, in your opinion, really defined the horror genre?
I mean, we started off with Jaws, talking about Jaws already. So Jaws is one really important one because it is not just like that this movie defines horror in such a subtle way of like everyday stuff that happens in real life. There are sharks out there. There are beaches, and people love to go to the beach.
Right.
So it's something a very normal situation for people. Just put in a place. To 90% of the movie, you don't even see the shark. You don't see Bruce on screen. Yeah. And you're like, damn, this is freaking scary because you don't see it. And this is one of those things. And Jaws is definitely one of those. There are so many other movies that The Shining, The Exorcist. What else do we have? I think Psycho.
Oh yeah,
Psycho is one absolute masterpiece of a movie. Back from 1968, I think it was. Yeah. What do you have?
For me, I think The Exorcist was huge. I remember seeing that, and I didn't see it until I was a much older kid. But I do remember one thing from Exorcist. There was the channel E would have E! True Hollywood Stories, and it would be like mini documentaries about certain things that have happened. And there was a commercial about the making of The Exorcist, and the image of the girl was burned into my mind. I couldn't sleep for like 5 days. It was one of the worst things. And all it was a damn commercial.
When I was a kid, I think I saw the scene where her mom tries to leave the room, and Reagan throws things around the room. And she's like spinning her freaking head. And she is like cussing at her mom like crazy. It's something that you haven't seen back in the 70s, in 1973.
You wouldn't see that.
You have not seen anything like that. And when I was a kid, I mean, it wasn't back in the 70s, it was in the 90s when I was a kid. But I saw just that scene because I think that my parents were watching it. And that scared the hell out of me. It was just a few seconds. It was just a tiny bit, but like,
this is a girl.
Yeah.
This is a girl on a bed with a demon inside of her. I mean, what you can't even think of that as a kid in your wildest nightmares. And there's nothing. And the music that was paired with that movie, the story that was paired with that movie, I think every bit and piece of that movie absolutely worked. And that's what That's what in the lead up until her exorcism, the lead up until that demonic starts to show itself was absolutely beautiful. I think, and it's crazy because you don't see a lot more demon possession movies after that. You wait until the 2000s and there's a ton of demon possession movies. I think because a director would never think or attempt to try to do something like The Exorcist because it was such a success. And going back to having horror movies make me feel things, when The Exorcist came out, people were reporting heart attacks when they watched it in theaters.
Yes, or they fainted in the theater. Yeah,
and I even read in a much more gory light miscarriages because it would be so much stress on a person to watch this. I mean, come on, that's incredible. That's the power of a movie.
It feels very morbid to actually celebrate something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Success about like
yeah.
I want to make you feel really happy, or I want to terrify the hell out of you that you're like, this is amazing. Yeah, definitely.
I think what it really did was it was something absolutely.